You know that one song you can't get enough of? Chances are it was made with a sample from Splice. Explore top packs made by your favorite producers, sketch out song ideas in seconds with Create Mode, and dive into a sample catalog that's so deep, it's dangerous. Find out why Splice is the industry's not-so-secret secret. Visit splice.com and try for free today. Welcome to the Fader Interview. I'm Alex Robert Ross, editorial director of The Fader. Natalie Mehring may be the world's most rational optimist. She looks at the planet's problems pragmatically and unflinchingly, with the knowledge that, in more ways than one, society has passed a dystopian point of no return, but also with a rare emotional nuance that allows this truth to coexist with a stubborn belief in the power of old-fashioned concepts like mercy, hope, and love. Mehring's singular sense of the universe has always permeated her work as Weyes Blood, manifesting in the eerie ambience of her debut album, The Outside Room, the heartbroken melodrama of its follow-up, The Innocents, and the lonely tableau of 2016's Front Row Seat to the Earth. But her vision crystallized on 2019's Titanic Rising, a near-perfect record that gently laid bare the unsustainability of postmodern human life. As it turns out, that project was the first in a three-part series, the second volume of which, And in the Darkness Hearts Aglow, arrives this Friday. Much like its predecessor, the new album is unabashedly allegorical, drawing lines from personal crises and relationship dramas to the collapse of community and the rise of the self-enforced surveillance state. In a letter to her listeners accompanying the new record, Mehring writes, quote, "Our mediums of communication are fraught with caveats, our pain and ironic joke born from a gridlocked panopticon of our own making, swirling on into infinity," end quote. And yet, despite these overwhelming odds, there's still hope for salvation from the yawning void. She continues, quote, "Chaos is natural, but so is negentropy, or the tendency for things to fall into order. These songs may not be manifestos or solutions, but I know they shed light on the meaning of our contemporary disillusionment," end quote. As long as our hearts continue to glow toward one another, signals in the endless noise of the cosmos, all is not lost. A few months before her new album's release, Mehring sat down with the Fader's Raphael Helfand for an interview that was rendered unusable due to a mic issue. So they met again a few weeks later to talk about invasive algorithms, astrology scams, and avoidant attachment styles.
First off, the two central concepts to this album, which are pretty related, like apophenia, the natural human tendency toward pattern seeking, and negentropy, which, from what I understand, is the more universal tendency towards order, like the opposite of entropy. So first off, could you talk about what those concepts mean to you and why they're so important to the record?
I guess I just kind of felt like it does feel like we're living in a really chaotic time, and it's important to know that chaos is just a part of the equation, and that there's also ecosystems of interdependent things that kind of, live in harmony with each other. And that exists just as much as the chaos. And they're two sides of a coin. And it's very easy to get lost in the chaos and forget about the negentropy. And apophenia, I think, it's just a natural human tendency that I don't know if it's like a major theme on the record. I would say it's just a good word for people to know about when they start to get a little too in their heads about synchronicities. But I don't actually think apophenia is like a theme on this album.
The album starts off with "It's not just me, it's everybody."
But it's all a part of one big thing. Oh, it's not just me. It's not just me. It's not just me. It's
that song feels more than any other, like sort of the record's mission statement, if you'll pardon the business language. It expresses, like in quite a straightforward way, I think, that our feelings of solitude are universal, but that there's a solution, which is mercy is the only cure for being so lonely. So what are some ways that we can show mercy to our fellow humans, not like on a grand performative scale, but like in our private everyday lives?
I think we really need like a place we can have kind of discourse and conversations about really nuanced things. I feel unfortunately the internet is just not the most fabulous place to do that. There's just too much anonymity and too much people who can kind of come out of nowhere and say something really hateful. And it's also kind of functioning within algorithms that are really specific. So it's almost like just being able to expand outside of your own realm and learn how to, yeah, kind of just grasp the extent of how, yeah, like how much we're all kind of living within algorithms that don't necessarily serve like a greater purpose besides perpetuating what they're good for or something. I don't know if that place exists yet, but I think that would be really valuable in the future. I think that unfortunately political conversations, even between politicians, are kind of like very reduced to like platitudes and, you know, people that look shiny, and it's hard, and certain politicians are definitely trying to have more nuanced conversations and talk more about things, but I think in general we just haven't really figured out a space for those conversations to happen. And then there's also the whole physicality of everything. Like as soon as somebody says something, if you can see who they are, like their physical appearance will be attacked. So I think that's really hard too. So yeah, I think it's just, yeah, kind of like mercy being like having, you know, some patience with the ugliness that the internet has kind of uncovered in everybody, and hoping that, you know, there exists an evolved version of the technology or an evolved version of like how we communicate, where it's not just kind of a medium of entertainment. I think entertainment has kind of become our main medium of communication. It's difficult to separate the two, but I hope that that would be kind of like the merciful aspects of the future.
Track 2, Children of the Empire, seems like more directed at a certain demographic, namely like white Americans who feel like long gone from the mess that we as a people have made. So on the thread of like calls to action, you say like, we don't have time anymore to be afraid, and we know that we're not free. And both those statements sound pretty urgent. So I'm wondering what you feel is like the path forward for breaking out of like this postmodern like crisis of privilege that specifically like white Americans are in.
I've been looking a lot into like what Extinction Rebellion is doing, and I like it, but I also think there's a lot of spectacle on spectacle. It's like all we can really think of at this point is like making some kind of bigger spectacle on top of the other spectacle, which is like a valuable effort. You know, it's like we're definitely trying to use having traction, you know, as it is, trying to get people to pay attention. But I think the problem is we're kind of at this tipping point where everybody knows what's happening, but it doesn't necessarily mean that anybody's doing anything about it. So it's like, I don't think we need to garner or like make any more awareness. It's more just like, yeah, like kind of finding a way to understand how decentralized the power has become. It's almost hard, like you don't really know who to attack because the power is evasive and it moves. It's like it could be the oil companies, or it could be the government, or it could be this. And anytime anybody puts a lot of pressure on the individual, being like, it's your responsibility to be green and save the planet, I think that's kind of a diversion. So I do think that there's definitely young kids who are trying to come up with really creative ways to kind of create a spectacle on top of the spectacle, to be like, wait, look at this. Like, you know, I'm going to put mashed potatoes on this painting. But whether or not that's going to really move the needle, it's like not really for me to say. I would hope it does, but I also feel like in some ways we're still kind of looking for a way out of the panopticon, which is like this gridlocked feeling that we're all kind of like functioning within a realm that, like, yeah, nuanced conversation and actual solutions get lost in the spectacle and in the stuff that's more entertaining or shiny. And I think that's really difficult for environmental scientists. Like, how are they going to make their stuff, you know, listened to? And then also, like, I think the other whole angle is just how everybody feels so powerless. In some ways, I do think that causes a lot of mental health issues with young people and existential stuff, where they kind of just lean deeper into like being a stan of something and belonging to something. And yeah, trying to have some semblance of a community based on celebrity, which I think is, it's kind of their cry for help. And you can't really blame them for that either. So yeah, it's a lot of abstract information, and that's really difficult to turn into a tangible action when we're dealing with like a multifaceted paradigm shift.
That leads us into The Worst Is Done, I think.
It's time to go out, pick up where we left off from. They say the worst is done, and it's time to find out what we've all
That's another pretty literal allegory, and it seems like, I mean, a lot of that seems to be referring to the pandemic, and people saying, it's over, let's get back outside. Towards the end of that song, it seems to become more and more about like, the worst is actually yet to come. Is that in reference to specifically the pandemic, or is it in reference to just everything in terms of the climate crisis, the self-surveillance state, et cetera?
Yeah, no, I think it's kind of in reference to everything, that like maybe that was the first crack in the fantasy, where it's kind of like we're like, oh wow, like if one thing goes wrong, like how much can our economy and society withstand that kind of expansion and contraction, where it's like, we're open, then we're closed, we're open, then we're closed, and like the people that lost money and the people that made money during that time, I think is very like telling to like what the future could look like. And I do think it is, yeah, kind of just the beginning on these like weird dystopian moments where we all have to like take a step back and be like, wow, it's really not the 90s anymore. Like my life's not going to be like my childhood or like how it was for my parents. It's going to be quite different. And I'm sure so many generations throughout history have withstood those kinds of cataclysms. But I do think that this one feels really abstract and new because there's so much technological and kind of like climate overlap, where it's almost like it feels completely new, but in some ways it's also like nothing new under the sun. So yeah, I kind of feel like that song is saying kind of both, like, yeah, the worst is done, but it's just going to keep getting more abstract and gnarly. Even though we're not living in a dark age anymore, we're not dealing with the plague, we're going to deal with something else.
You've already shot down that apophenia is a big part of this album, but do you think that like we have such a strong desire to like return to whatever we think of as normal? Do you see that as related to apophenia at all?
Well, yeah, I mean, apophenia is a survival tactic. It's how we survive. It's being able to read what's going on around us and kind of gain information and access things. So I do think survival, definitely, like going back to how things used to be as a mode of survival, is definitely just a reaction to what's happening and feeling like we're kind of spinning out of control and our social fabric is fraying on a level that's not biologically good for people. So yeah, I would say like, yeah, we're attracted to harmony because I think that we tend to lean more towards benevolence, and that's a really beautiful thing. But if we really were that obsessed with apophenia, I think we would have taken a really good, strong look at history and kind of have a greater grasp on what's going on right now. But I don't feel like people have apophenia for history. I think they have it for like self-serving stuff, like astrology and like dating and things like that. So it's like trying to apply it to like greater societal or structural conversations, I think is a little bit like assuming the best of humanity. But I think it's more of a day-to-day vibe with apophenia.
I take it you're not an astrology person.
I think it's really fun, but I do think it's a little sad that that's like people kind of follow it like it's so structurally sound, when in reality it's like once you get into the nitty-gritty, it's pretty complex and full of a lot of Barnum statements, which are statements that feel really personal but like could apply to anybody. But yeah, I do think that it's fun, and I do think that, yeah, if you like patterns, there's a lot that show up with astrology for sure.
Do you think that that's any sadder than like organized religion in that way?
I do, because I think that astrology is in some ways there's no salvation or redemption or like enlightenment or transcendence. It's all kind of like, it works really well within capitalism because it's like kind of preaching to your identity. But I think some astrologers probably transcend that and they're like, oh, we're all in the cosmos together and it's just a beautiful interwoven system. Like I'm sure there's a great take that a lot of normal people don't have, because I think most people just read their compatibility chart and they're like, I can't date
Yeah.
that. The more you get into it, the deeper you get into it, the more true it gets. And I think that's just true of any like system. It's like the more that you get into it, the more you will be attracted to seeing its value, and then it'll become more true. And then before you know it, maybe you're manifesting your life by believing in it so much. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I just think that goes back to the apophenia thing where it's like when you really drink the Kool-Aid, you drink the Kool-Aid and that makes it true.
Do you think that that's the case even when you go into something with like the opposite bias? If you try to take a deep dive into something to find proof against it, do you think that like that goes that can go the same way?
I think that when you deep dive into anything, it could kind of go either way. Because I've definitely heard stories of people trying to like disprove things and then all of a sudden being converted. Be like, oh, I was going to disprove this, and then I was won over. And I've heard about some research of astrological people that like basically gave people random charts, and a lot of people had like experiences with a chart that wasn't their own, where they felt like it was really theirs. And I think that has a lot to do with archetypes and how like, a lot of these archetypes that astrology works with are within everybody. It's kind of similar with tarot, where it's like these archetypes are meaningful. And when you reorganize them or like put them in a different mixture, you can have an experience with them all the same. So it's like the building blocks are pretty easy to work with. And I think that, yeah, it's kind of like a personal journey seeking meaning out of anything. So it's like if something strikes you as meaningful, I would never want to take that away from somebody. And I think that if somebody is trying to denounce something and then all of a sudden is converted, I think that kind of says a lot to how subjective all this stuff really is,
Those two songs, Children of the Empire and The Worst Is Done, I sort of see as like sonically or just generally a bit connected to like Everyday on the last album. They're both like quite upbeat songs that are dealing with pretty heavy stuff. Was it something about the subject material that made you want to go in that sort of not exactly like a happy sad direction? That's a little bit too reductive, but like made you want to make those tracks maybe the most upbeat on their respective albums?
Yeah, no, I wanted Children of the Empire to be like a real anthem, and I wanted The Worst to feel like it was groovy. We're all kind of just like being able to talk about what happened and what's happening in a way that was not like a super downer experience, because I do think we can laugh at the absurdity of it all sometimes, and I like kind of adding things that are tonally dissonant with each other. I think that's kind of how reality is. It's like a lot of marriages of opposites and things that don't seem compatible, but when you make it work, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's kind of like reality. It's quite bittersweet. It's heavy, but it's upbeat. It's yeah, I kind of like doing stuff like that.
I want to get to like Grapevine, Twin Flame, and Given Thing all sort of at once next, because those are songs about that all sort of deal with relationship dynamics, I think. But first, I wanted to talk about the classic rom-com Possession, which I was lucky enough to catch at the Roxy during your New York movie weekend. The movie is about a Western spy who returns from behind the Iron Curtain to a wife who seems to no longer love him or their son. And without giving too much away, things get a little kooky and weird. Anna and Mark's situation ends up being like pretty specific, I'd say. But is there anything you think we can learn from them 40 years later?
I don't know. I think that movie is really like about relationship drama and the sexual torment of people being together and not together. I would give anything just to have that script printed out as like a coffee table book, because some of the lines and yeah, just the conversations that are had are so deep. But yeah, I think it's a very symbolic film for jealousy. I think it's ultimately wrapped up in jealousy, and the whole Iron Curtain thing is like very subliminal in there as well. It's kind of woven in and baked into it. Makes a lot of sense for the director, because he had to live that. But yeah, I do think that it's ultimately about it is about jealousy, and is the creature is God. And I don't want to give up
Well,
too much.
Go back to the camp with the kerosene lamps and the words. When you were mine, and I was yours for a time.
Grapevine tells a pretty sad story, I think, of like a seemingly one-sided heterosexual relationship where the man can't see his shadow and is described as an emotional cowboy with no hat and no boots. Is that just someone who's out of touch with their emotions and like closed off from others? or is there like a deeper meaning to that really great turn of phrase?
I think, well, the idea of the grapevine is also like the freeway. It's called the grapevine, but also this idea that we have like an internal grapevine that's like kind of like a chain back to all our old woundings. And I think the male character in Grapevine isn't, it's not a one-sided relationship. It's that they haven't dealt with their emotional wound in some ways, where it's like it shows up in like narcissism and kind of feeling overwhelmed and taking things personally that aren't meant for them, and how if you're on the receiving end of something like that, they end up gaslighting you because they're so overwhelmed by their stuff they haven't dealt with. I think that happens a lot in relationships where people come pretty wounded, and things like the channel of communication gets really choked by the inability to really express what's going on beneath the surface. So yeah, I think it was more just about like kind of being with somebody who's really self-involved and not really thinking that means that they're evil, just like that's an unsustainable union, you know?
Twin Flame, which is kind of an outlier on the album with like its synthetic drums, and also Given Thing, they both seem to be describing like some, at least like maybe not the same relationship, but like related relationships, but like maybe in a bit more positive light. I think like something that the through line between those is like one party like sort of always pulling away. Do you think there's like any hope for a relationship like that, where one person is like constantly pulling away and the other person is chasing?
No, I think those relationships should end. I don't think that's good. There are freaky people that like freaky stuff though, and they like live off of the drama. I know couples like that where they get a kick out of it. I remember a family member of mine sat me down and he's like, I don't know why your parents have made it work. I don't get it. But, you know, I've made it work because we fight a lot and it works out for us. I remember thinking,
Yeah.
whoa. But yeah, I mean, everybody's different. But I think in general, the needy, distant tug and pull is a sign of two people that aren't really ready. And it kind of leads to a lot of projection, and, you know, kind of it gets a little convoluted, and people can't, like I said before, the channel of communication gets a little clogged by old wounds. You know, like a lot of people that are avoidant in their attachment style probably have wounds of maybe being controlled by family members, or, you know, like they're scared just as much as somebody who's anxious is scared. It's like two scareds don't make a right, you know, two fearful people. I don't think they can like overcome their fears together per se. And I do think that Twin Flame is like kind of making fun of the idea that we have soulmates, but the Twin Flame soulmate is like the destructive soulmate. The highs are so high and the lows are so low that it's just destructive and not sustainable. And that's what I think of as a Twin Flame. And a Given Thing is kind of about like codependency and kind of like feeling like, oh my God, there's something in this person that's like the missing key to my whole life. But at the same time, how that doesn't actually mean anything in the context of a relationship. That a relationship is like kind of between two people. And if it's not coming really naturally, if love is really difficult, you know, we have to ask like, how much work is it versus how much grace is it? And I think that's what's a lot of modern people are struggling with trying to understand, is like, how much grace should they have in a relationship versus how perfect and easy should it just come together? Because you kind of hear both. You hear people are like, oh, it was a lot of hard work. And other people are like, it just magically happened. Everybody has to kind of make that choice, which one it is. There's a lot of questions about intimacy and, you know, trying to access something universal within a relationship. It can be really difficult when two people are on a different page.
We are more just the and I'm standing here laughing at my shame. 'Cause you're my twin
Going back to like the music of both them, Twin Flame has that drum machine in it. Like it's unusual for a Weyes Blood song. It sounds like not like clubby, but like it sounds like almost like something you'd hear in like a lounge, like a waiting room in space or something. I don't know. That's another song with a bit of a dissonance between its subject matter and its sound, and even its title, because as you said, like Twin Flame to a lot of people I think means like, you know, there's this beautiful thing where when you look a little bit deeper, especially in your song, like it can be a bit destructive. Were both those songs lyrics first, or like melody sound first?
A given thing was just a given thing in the melody, and then the rest of the lyrics kind of filled out itself. But
Mm.
Twin Flame was actually kind of like the lyrics first. I like the texture of like kind of cold electronics, and I felt like there was a cool meeting point between a lot of the acoustic stuff and the cold stuff. And I wanted to have one song that felt really cold, but was talking about like a flame, like I like that dichotomy. And I also felt like it was just time in the album for like a little change of texture. But most of my albums have at least like one electronic drum or two electronic drum songs. I think it's just pretty ballsy in terms of how much electronic drums are going on.
Yeah, the last thing about Given Thing, just like I like sort of near the end of that song, I think there's a lyric, it's not a one-way street. Sometimes our love is enrapturing, and other times it's unraveling in front of me. So like that, I mean, that I guess like complicates a bit, like at least my initial idea of those songs of a one-sided relationship.
Yeah, and I think that's a thing, like, where it's like something could feel so good for a minute, and then all of a sudden it unravels, like, it just doesn't withstand the pressures and the complications of time,
We talked kind of at length about God turned me into a flower last time, but you said something that I hadn't really thought about in reference to that story, that Narcissus's issue was not that he was self-obsessed, but that he thought his reflection was another person, and that he became obsessed with that idealized other. God turned me into a flower, which directly refers to what happens to him at the end of his story. Do you think like the solution to, or like the antithesis of people's escapist tendencies, if that's what the Narcissus myth is about, is like a return to nature?
I do think that in order to withstand huge geological shifts, that you'd wanna be kinda soft and pliable about it. Like, I think the rigidity of wanting everything to constantly stay the same, or wanting to have the life that we thought we should have, that is a form of rigidity that I don't think will serve anybody that well in the future. So there is like a pliability and a softness to a flower, and it's also like a catharsis, kind of like, if there's nothing we can really do, that's fine too. We can just be nature, because that's what we really are.
It's the curse of losing yourself when the mirror takes you too far. Oh God, turn me into flower.
After our last interview, my engineer, Tony, he broke the tragic news to me that all that audio is unusable by telling me that there was more noise than signal. And so I guess to indulge myself a little bit, searching for a signal in the noise to me seems like a pretty perfect description for what this album is doing. So like the central metaphor, hearts aglow in the darkness, looking for love in all the wrong places on the title track. It feels like a more human-centric description for like the eternal struggle of the sound engineer. Am I onto something there?
Well, yeah, no, I think all these things are symbolic for each other, like light in the
Mhm.
darkness and the signal and the noise. It's like we
Mhm.
do live in a lot of dark matter, and that's like the greatest symbol of all, is that there's this matter in the universe we can't even perceive. I think that's so
Mhm.
fascinating. And so the things we can perceive definitely are that, like, yeah, there's a benevolence to our light, and there's like a desire for negentropy and harmony. And I
Mhm.
think that that's worth it. That's worth, talking about and kind of keying into, even if that's not the whole picture. I think that's a cool part about being human, if that makes sense.
In your own life in general, do you feel like generally confident in your ability to separate signal and noise?
No, because I think in some ways they're so interwoven now. It's like you never know when you're getting your head invaded by something. Like a great example would be like I use social media for work, and I like, make posts about when I put out songs, and I like keep people abreast about like all the stuff I'm doing in a way that feels, like healthy for me. I'm not like sharing or oversharing or feeling like I constantly have to be on display. But just like a casual, comment, or like every once in a while I'll just see something and all of a sudden it'll affect, the way I process my mood, or like it'll affect the way I thought in such a way where it's like, that's like a very artificial invasion that happens so frequently that it's like there's so many algorithms that were like especially with Instagram, where it's like even the ads they show you or the posts they show you, it's like they can tell what the spiciest chili pepper is. And they're like, okay, we're going to put that in there because that's going to work really good. And then all of a sudden you're like down a rabbit hole that you didn't want to be down. And I think that that is just human. I don't think anybody is like fully exempt from the parasitic qualities of that. So it's like, I'd like to think that I live a pretty righteous existence, but I'm kind of just like everybody else. Like, I don't think anybody goes on there and doesn't have some kind of weird like moment of having to see something or feel something they didn't really need to see or feel that day. I think that it just feels artificial because it's not necessarily like something that we've included in other experiences in the past. But I do think that it's becoming so much a part of our lives every day that now it's maybe the equivalent of like walking to the store and having somebody like elbow you or like, it's like it's becoming just the way we all communicate in society. And so it's like, I do think that there's a whole new set of rules, and we're still kind of evolving, trying to figure out like how to protect our mental health within that, especially because it's so like opportunistic and capitalistic, and everybody kind of has to like promote themselves in such a way that it is very confusing. If a comments section was like a room of people, obviously it would be like very different than a comment section, because the anonymity and the kind of like, creating a persona or creating an image that's very controlled. So I do think it's a whole new set of rules, and it creates like a whole new kind of agoraphobia that, as opposed to being scared to leave your house, it's like you're kind of scared to like dive into the cesspool of like our new, form of communication.
Making music in a way is like sort of like literally separating signal from noise. For you, is like songwriting part of that, more metaphorical process?
I do think so. Yeah. I think it's like taking pain and making it this transcendent experience. I think that when you can take suffering and pain and turn it into something kind of universal and beautiful, it's like you've created meaning out of something that felt like so meaningless. So yeah, I do think finding signal in the noise it's like we're psychologically prone to apophenia, like you said, and we're psychologically prone to seeking meaning because yeah, it's almost like our consciousness is a strange like feedback loop on itself, like the universe witnessing itself.
That was Weyes Blood talking to the Fader's Raphael Helfand. Her new album, And in the Darkness Hearts Aglow, is out this Friday, November 18, via Sub Pop. The Fader interview is engineered by Tony Giambroni. The executive producer is Alex Robert Ross, and the associate producer is Raphael Helfand. We'd like to thank Loughton Audio for providing our microphones. You can find them online at lautenaudio.com. And we'd like to thank James Ivey for providing our intro music. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you left a 5-star rating and review. If you like listening to The Fader, good news. We're now on the new live radio app, AMP. Download it from the App Store now. And keep an eye on thefader.com for essential music news, interviews, and essays. We'll be back soon with another episode of The Fader Interview. Goodbye until then. You know that one song you can't get enough of? Chances are it was made with a sample from Splice. Explore top packs made by your favorite producers, sketch out song ideas in seconds with Create Mode, and dive into a sample catalog that's so deep, it's dangerous. Find out why Splice is the industry's not-so-secret secret. Visit splice.com and try for free today.